Okay, I think I will get started. Thanks for confirming that you can hear me. Let me start with a few logistics. First of all, welcome and thank you for joining us. This is our 6th annual cycle of the Cornerstone Foundation's Impact Grant Program. We're excited to get going. I'm excited to either begin the conversation with you on this or continue it in some cases. A few logistics first. You should all be muted by default, just to keep the noise down. If you need to jump off or shout something, you can. It's not a huge group, but we're going to try to keep everyone muted. There is a chat window to your right that should be open. Feel free, if you're having any technical difficulties, please let us know through that chat window. My colleague Jackie will be watching that and there to help out. If you have questions about the grant specifically or the things that I'm talking about, also feel free to put them in the chat window. I will be a little bit busy for the hour. I've got a lot of talking to do, so I won't be able to answer the questions, but I do promise that I will get back to you in email if you submit a question in the chat, or absolutely feel free to follow up with me by email afterwards, and we can address those too. I will be sending a link to the recording after we're finished. Probably just give me about maybe 48 hours on that for you to rewatch it or to share it internally, or if you have to jump off a little bit early. So don't worry, you will all be getting a copy of the recording and then the resources that I'm mentioning as well. Okay. So that said, let's get going. My goal today in this hour is to really help arm you with the information you would need to determine whether this is something you want to pursue or not. I know that applying for any grants is no small undertaking, and we don't want to waste your time. So I'll walk through the components and the features of the grant, really how it works. I'll try to paint a picture a little bit by telling you about 2 of our current grantees and how they're leveraging and have been leveraging their grant. And then I'll help you, ask some questions of your internal organization and program to help you take a look inward to assess whether this is something that makes sense for you, whether it makes sense for you at this point or maybe at some point in the future. And then we'll talk about the timeline and next steps. What I've saved for the end is, it won't be a live demo, but we will walk through the core functionality of the learning management system, really in context of our current grantees. So you'll see some different examples of what things look like. I'll talk about how they function. I save this to the end because I know sometimes people have to jump off early, and if you need to, this is something that you can go back to in the recording, but I do think it's a really key component for anyone, of course, looking at a system. I will mention, too, that we are going to be scheduling a deeper dive demo, I call it really an hour-and-a-half demo in the end of January, where I will bring in a Cornerstone Solution consultant, somewhere much more skilled than I, at digging into the system, where we'll really spend a concerted amount of time looking at the learning management system, asking specific questions, and getting hands-on in the system. So this is sort of a teaser to that, but should hopefully at least give you an idea of what the core components and the functionality will be. Okay. I do hear that, I don't know if someone is asking me a question or there's some background noise, but yeah, feel free to mute yourself if you don't have a question. Okay, so to begin, for those not familiar with Cornerstone On Demand or the foundation, I'll give you just a little bit of background. So the Cornerstone On Demand Foundation is the corporate foundation of Cornerstone On Demand, the company, which is a leading talent management software and services provider. And by talent management software, that is sort of hire to retire front-end HR components for employees and managers primarily, including recruiting, performance management, learning management and development, compensation, and succession is sort of the full realm of the software product that the company, the Cornerstone, the company, has developed through the years. So Cornerstone, the foundation, has been in existence from about 1999. We were created by Cornerstone CEO and founder as a lifelong vision to harness Cornerstone's technology and expertise to support the nonprofit sector, and as Adam Miller, our founder, likes to say, to educate the world. We are a 501c3, but we're not a typical grant-making institution, as the donations we make are in-kind software and services, as I will demonstrate when I talk more about the impact grant. So we have 3 core programs that we operate: our technology grants and software donations, the impact grant program being the one that we're here to discuss today. We also have a pro bono consulting arm where we match HR experts, both from inside our organization and clients of Cornerstone, with nonprofits who are looking for support, coaching, additional resources to support their learning performance activities. And then we do have open online learning initiatives, and I'll spend a minute just talking about these because they, regardless of where we end up with the impact grant, these platforms may be things that you can take advantage of really in the short term. We've got 3 of our READY portals, we call them: Nonprofit Ready, Disaster Ready, and Teaching Ready, which have free open online learning resources targeted at these 3 areas, which are our 3 focus areas of the foundation. So, make a note of these. If you would like, feel free to take a look at them after the call, share them with your organization, with HR, and if there's any way that these resources can be of service to your staff and your organization itself, we'd be happy to send more information or set up a follow-up call on that. Okay, so now getting into the impact grant itself. The goal of the program, and what I imagine your goals are, and what attracted you to the invite, is that you would be looking to significantly scale the reach and impact of your externally focused training programs. Now, I italicize externally focused because that really is a key component of the grant and what we're looking for. Many of our programs within the foundation and Cornerstone itself focus on internal learning and talent management for staff and employees of an organization. And because of that, we really identified this need, particularly in the nonprofit space, for those that could also use a learning management system for their external programs and for groups who do significant training to non-employees. It may be your volunteers, your partners, your program beneficiaries, different types of individuals that are currently taking training as part of the different impact grants that are out there include home visitors, teachers and after-school providers, adult literacy tutors, the high-skilled refugees and immigrants, volunteer coaches, so really across the gamut, depending on what the mission of your organization is, and assuming that there is a significant training component to that. I list 5,000 to 500,000 here because it is a very wide goalpost, I know, but I do tell people that if within the next 3 to 5 years you are not looking to reach somewhere between that number, then perhaps this isn't the right program. The system is still, it is a large, robust system. If we know impact comes in all shapes and sizes, but if your universe of who you're looking to train is 100 to 500 people over the course of those years, then I think that what we will uncover, we'll discover together, is that this might be more of a program or larger a program than you need. So again, very large goalposts, but sort of a minimum of 5,000, and that 500,000 can be more. If you're looking to reach a million, the top number is unlimited. I just try not to intimidate people because I know there's not a whole lot of programs that that have user bases above that, but that lower scale is an important one to call out. Most often I'm working with programs teams, whereas again on the internal side we operate more in the HR talent space. These programs usually sit pretty squarely in programs. Now that said, it really does merit a cross-functional team that's working on it. So we do expect that you know, there is tie-in to training in HR, the IT team, marketing, all the other different components that are effective or that are essential for really effective programs. From a requirement perspective, I did mention that we have focus areas within the foundation. Those 3 areas actually are disaster ready, workforce development, and education. And some of our programs are constrained to those 3 areas. This is one of our programs that is open. We do prioritize organizations with missions in that area, but really we are just looking for all of you who are addressing a critical society and or environmental need and really have training sort of at the core of what you do. We look to select between 1 and 3 grantees each year. And the slide that everyone waits for, and I've moved it up. Actually, this used to be farther towards the end, and I've decided to just get it out there because that's usually is where people's questions are. Is really is the cost. What's the pricing framework on here? So we'll talk a little bit more in detail so you'll understand what these years entail. But really, at a high level, the first year, which we consider year 0, which is the year that you'd implement the system, 2018 for this cycle, and then the 2 years following have 0 cost for software and services. We'll break that down a little bit more. And then in years 3 and beyond, there is a flat software rate for unlimited users of $30,000 per year for software, and then any additional services which would entail additional technical projects or perhaps an implementation of an additional module, functional module. Those come at our foundation discount of 50% off of the cornerstone rates. From a contractual perspective, the initial impact grant contract runs through the end of that year 2, so the first sort of 2.5 years, and includes all of the components that we deem are needed for the implementation and the technical pieces. And then we create a renewal contract for those years 3+. Our standard contracts are 3 years. There are options to make that shorter if we knew, but there is nothing that binds either you or the foundation to that renewal in year 3. Now, our hope is that all of the grants and all the organizations that we're working with are really looking to use this for the long haul, and that it's not just sort of a whim and something that's being tested, but we do understand that situations and scenarios change in 3 years and the reality on the ground might be different. But this is what sort of the basic framework of those years look like from a grant perspective. Okay, so what's included in the grant? As I mentioned, those years 0 through 2, so 2018 to 2020, there are no software and service costs. And what does that mean? So the software really brings unlimited usage of all of the components of the Cornerstone Learning Management System. I've included a few examples here of sort of the big topics. It's not exhaustive. The exhaustive list of everything in the LMS would be too much to include here, but important to know that there is no difference of what you as a grantee would be allowed to use from the Learning Management System as any Cornerstone client. So all of the functionality that's available through the Learning Management System would be available to you for this. And the unlimited piece means that there is no price per head. Our goal with the program and what we recognized was missing is an opportunity to for organizations to really scale large and reach a large number of individuals, which becomes very cost prohibitive, as you would know if you've been looking into systems when your numbers increase, and especially when you don't know what your numbers will be. So that is why we really set an unlimited usage in terms of a user base and that flat rate in those ongoing year costs, so that our intent is not to penalize you for growth. That's what we're here for. We want you to be able to grow and and be able to count on what that cost will be, even with exponential growth. Also included is the software implementation. We'll talk about what that looks like of working with you to make the LMS function and look how you want it to, as well as technical integrations if there are other systems that we're integrating with. The integration from our end is included in the grant, but now there may be integration costs or resources required depending on what the other system is that you're working with. And then we take a really holistic approach, or we try to take a very holistic approach to this, and we know that software alone is not what's going to make you successful here. So I'm very fortunate in my role to be able to have really a deep bench of people and experts that I can pull in based on the needs of our grantees. And this changes as we go and as we evolve. But here, the learning, graphic design, marketing, social strategy, this has been some of the areas where the most additional support and resources have been sought from our grantees, and you know, we try to be as responsive as possible and fill the gaps so that we really can help be strategic with you and not just a software provider. And as important of knowing what is included, I also like to talk about what's not included for your planning purposes. So third-party platforms. Often the learning management system is not the only platform that you would have involved in your program. If you are doing virtual instructor-led training, you might need WebEx or Adobe, GoToMeeting. If you are doing e-commerce and paying for training or having people pay for training, you would need something like CyberSource that's managing the payments. You also might have a website where people are coming to. You might be on Salesforce that you're looking to integrate with. So there are most likely or often going to be other touch points, and you maintain your relationships with those other platforms or parties or applications, whatever they may be. You will have independent relationships where you arrange pricing with them, and then it's the question of the integration and making the systems talk to each other. And that's where I mentioned earlier that integration we will manage as part of the grant from the Cornerstone side, but there may be additional fees or people hours required on that on the third-party platform side, in addition to any licensing arrangements that those third-party platforms require. A big one, and one that always comes up, is content development. So, you know, do we build the content? Do we have the content for you? You know, where does the content come from? So you are responsible for content creation. Cornerstone has some very basic tools to develop content, but that really is not something that we stress as part of the grant, or really as part of using the learning management system. And we do recommend that people use tools, content development tools. The most common ones and ones that we find most often used, Articulate Storyline, Captivate. These might be terms that you're familiar with. If not, you know, we can definitely help provide you with some direction and some research in terms of you know, what we see is most popular now with the different content authoring tools. But basically, whether you're creating e-learning courses, self-paced e-learning courses, whether your training is on PowerPoint, more and more often it is on video, materials, documents, whatever it may be, that is what you bring to the table, bring to the grant. We help you load and manage it on the system, and that's what then you're distributing, tracking, training, and reporting on. So again, we can provide recommendations and advice through all of this, but the key piece here is knowing that you are owning the content, and that's something that hopefully is already a work in progress. And to that point, you know, where should your content be at this point? And how do we assess readiness? It's something we have a lot of conversations with about people. So really we know that it is a process of transitioning any in-person or sort of historical training into an e-learning or a blended learning approach, and we talk to people on all ends of the continuum, from those that just had, are just realizing that's the direction they're going on, to the point that they've got all this content and they just need somewhere to launch it from. So we've learned that to be the best candidate for this grant, you will either have existing content that is pretty ready to go on an LMS, or have done or in the process of doing significant strategy work to help you assess the next steps of what you need to build out your content. And that could be, that you've got teams trained internally to do that work, or you could be outsourcing it to another organization, who develops content. And as I mentioned, all these things we could help you with, but it's helpful, I think, to know that if you're in the session and thinking that this all sounds great, but I haven't really given any thought yet to how we're going to go about creating this content, you might want that to be your focus for this upcoming year, or the next 6 months, if you will, and consider looking at an impact grant then in a year or two down the road. Most people, to some degree, develop content and implement the system at the same time, and we know that development is usually an ongoing and never-ending process, but we do want to make sure that at a minimum you've got a solid content strategy in place, if not the content itself, before starting to implement. And that's something that you'll see in the application that we do ask a fair amount of questions around. Okay, hopefully that's helpful. I'm going to just pause. Someone send me a quick note on chat and just say hi, we're still here. Again, when everyone's muted, I do just fear sometimes that I'm talking to myself. Can you hear me? Yes. Thank you, Jackie. Okay. Good. I just needed a little human interaction for energy to keep going. Timeline. What does this look like? I mentioned the years 0 through 2. So this is what it breaks down to, and we are here, although we're technically on the other side of the box. We're not quite into Q1 yet, but we're pretty close. And yes, to the question on the chat, I'm going to be passing out, I'm going to send a recording and the resources from the webinar. So I don't feel you need to take notes on all of this. I will be sending it out. Okay, so we are really just at the very beginning of the application process here, where we're going to be doing some education sessions. I've got another one of these overview webinars. I mentioned we're going to have a demo available to those that are interested. And then getting into Q2, and then Q1 is really the application. Application will be due in March. We do our selection in April, May. We begin contracting. The last 2 quarters, the end of the year, is for implementation. Does not take that entire time, but when we have several groups, there's often priorities and timelines that people are working towards, so we just sort of roughly say that the end of the year, that the second half of the year is about getting the system up and live, so that by the beginning of 2019, in the case for this year, you would have users, you would be up and running, and whether that's to your entire audience or to pilot groups, that's determined by your strategy, but the goal is to really have the lights on by 2019, and that could be a little bit earlier, again, if you're an earlier one to implement, but that's really the target for all of the grantees to be live by then. Year 1 and year 2 is to just sort of be off to the races, to be learning the system, to be really developing a whole lot of self-sufficiency and expertise on it, and to continue to evolve your programs during these times. We find often people find new use cases that they didn't anticipate, that because they've got a platform, they find it really easy just to bring either new training materials or new audiences onto the platform. And the goal for those years 1 and 2, is for you to really build that solid use case, too, for justifying the system. Then when 2021 comes around and there is that $30,000 then yearly rate, what we've found, and really in the large majority of our grantees, is by that time they have proved this model, and it has made it much easier for them to fundraise for all types of things, but using the system, and because they've got the system as a backbone for any of their offerings now, that the fundraising for that ongoing fee becomes much more straightforward by that point with the years of experience and the demonstrated success behind them. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about implementation, because it is it's not insignificant of a time period or of a process, and it really is critical to the success of how you end up using the system. So what does it look like? We ask that you have a team assembled and ready by July, and now you know that for some people it'll be July, some August, that there is some flexibility there, but best to plan for July. And that team would consist of an identified executive sponsor, a project manager, a lead administrator, IT, at least as informed, depending on the projects, they may need to be more or less involved. And really the heavy lifting will be for the project manager and or lead administrator, which we ask to expect about a 50 to 70% allocation during the implementation time period. It goes in fits and starts and waves, absolutely. That's not consistent the whole time, but we really want to try to prepare people for clearing enough space to dedicate to the implementation. And worth mentioning is that sometimes, all three of those roles is the same person or two people. Sometimes it's 6 people. So they don't all have to be individual humans, but people have to play those respective roles. I would say it tends to be that we work with implementation teams of about 2 to 6 people, and there will always be people, who are more responsible and accountable, and then those that are more informed and, aware. But it's sort of a rough framework of what we look for in that team. And I will say that sometimes that team exists, and at this point you know who all these roles are but often too you know that you will need to hire for the lead administrator or project manager to come in, and we know that that's dependent often on getting a grant too. And we can help with that. I have some job descriptions of what people have hired for in those roles before, all things that we have seen. The implementation, standard implementation, runs about 8 to 10 weeks, and it is a very defined process going through stages: discovery, design, configuration, and testing. We assign you an implementation manager or an implementation coach that leads you through all of this, and is very clear about the expectations from your team. There are several weekly team meetings, some status meetings, some more workshops. There's a significant amount of online administrator training that we expect our administrators to complete, and really will hold you to that. We know that that's a key component of success, and Cornerstone does a really good job. We've got an extensive amount of resources for administrators to take advantage of, and we provide guidance of sort of when's the best time to be taking what, but that making sure that there's time allocated to take training is a really key part of an implementation. And then we also offer or include in our grant a 2-day either on-site or virtual training, which we usually hold a little bit closer to when you're going live, but that's really to help then make sure that the administrators are set to support the live system and live users. And through all that period, there is a lot of hands-on work in the system. I meant to mention earlier, but for those that aren't aware, Cornerstone is a software as a service platform, or SaaS platform, which means that you are configuring the system to meet your needs. We are not customizing the system. It means that all Cornerstone clients are on the same code base. There is a process of quarterly enhancements and releases that update everyone at the same time. You choose what you want to take part on, but the system is versionless, essentially. You will never get out of date on your Cornerstone platform. So this period of implementation is really where you are making those configuration decisions. And I describe that as there's like Cornerstone has, thousands and thousands of flips and switches that you get to choose. And that implementation process is us helping educate you on what those switches mean and helping you decide which ones you want to turn on, turn off, make red, make blue, so that the learning management system functions the way that you want it to and looks the way that you want it to, which can be very different from how your neighbor would be doing it. So that's what this period is about, setting up those sort of baseline preferences and choices, and then once you're educated on that, you can continue to make and change those decisions as time goes on after you're live. And our goal is to have you be knowledgeable enough so you can make educated decisions and not necessarily require Cornerstone support. We will provide Cornerstone support, but we all know that the more you can do on your own, sort of the more freedom and flexibility you have. So the bottom line here is really that having the skilled resources and proper allocation of time is key for a successful implementation. Okay, so there's implementation, and then there is post-implementation, which, if all goes well, is really the majority of our relationship. The bulk of our relationship should be after you go live. Implementation is sort of the period that we all have to go through together to get to that, that married state on the other end. So this is really just to show you that we do not send you off into the wilderness to fend for yourself. We continue to support you in meaningful ways. We maintain discussions at an executive and sponsorship level. We ensure that we've got, we are sort of aligned contractually and from your priorities and strategic perspective. We've got many, many resources through what we call our Client Success Center that we provide to you in terms of best practices and troubleshooting and connection and community with other administrators and Cornerstone experts, and then global product support, which is a fairly standard sort of help call ticket process. What's important to know, though, at this point, even though this seems super far off since you haven't even gotten a grant yet, but the part that I want to stress is that it is important to think about the ongoing resources that you would need on your team to continuously provide the care and feeding, if you will, for a system. It is not a, build it and they will come and the system will just go on and support itself. Any system, this system, no exception, requires time and resources and expertise to continue to grow the system, whether it's growing to continue to meet your ongoing needs from a programmatic perspective and keeping up to date with the ongoing changes and evolution enhancements of the software itself, as that's how a SaaS platform operates. So quarterly, every system administrator needs to have a time set aside to review any of the enhancements, the updates, identify whether it's things they want to take advantage of, and assess how to apply it to the organization. So again, the point of this really being is just to file away in your head and for your planning and resources purposes is that as important as it is to staff up to get the system live, it is equally, if not more important, to ensure you've got the right team in place from an ongoing perspective to continue to support and grow the system. Okay, so that was really the nuts and bolts, and I'm sure there'll be more questions, and feel free again to send them in chat. I'll get back to you afterwards or follow up with me after. But I'd like to move now to paint a little bit of a picture, tell the stories of two of our grantees who are very different, that are both part of our original cohort of our first grantee cohort. So Darkness to Light is a child sexual abuse prevention organization, and they have training that they provide to teachers and youth-facing organizations. So before the Impact Grant, They did this primarily face-to-face through facilitators and lunchrooms and, you know, community houses across the country. They did develop a basic e-learning course that they were sort of playing with, but they knew they couldn't grow with it, and they needed a more scalable platform to be able to reach their quickly growing demand and partner base for it. And they are training both facilitators and end users and partners. So there are just multiple audiences, which I know is the case with many of you, is that there's not just one end user, one end learner. Often there are layers. You've got the end user consuming the training. You've got facilitators who are trained and certified to deliver that training. You've got partners who sort of manage their own world. So important. One of the things that LMS is bringing a lot of value to is being able to keep those audiences straight and distinct when they need to be. And that was a big deal for Darkness to Light as well. So after the Impact Grant, or once they've got up and running on it, they were able to launch a brand new online course. They work with a vendor. They continue to work with an e-learning vendor to help build and update their courses. They targeted for different audiences. They developed a version in Spanish. And because of the grant, and they weren't paying for it up front, they were able to offer the course at no cost for the initial grant period of 2 years, which really helped them build out partnerships and their relationships to have that offering, which then has transitioned over time as they have gotten better understanding of their costs. Now they offer grants for the program, but they have been able to move to then extended e-commerce model where they are charging for the training. And the whole process then gets streamlined with the registration, the credit card processing, all the reporting. They have had and have accomplished very ambitious goals. You'll see what they trained, sort of the numbers that they trained before the grant, and then the large audiences that they've trained after and continue to. Now, what I find most impressive in all of this is the size of their organization. Darkness to Light is very small. They've got about 12 to 13 full-time employees, a little over a $1 million budget. So they are on the smaller end of the organizations that we work with, but the top end in terms of the numbers and the reach that their training has. Now, another organization, which is quite different, and a lot larger as perspective. Ounce of Prevention has about 300 full-time employees, about a $50 million budget. So looks very different as an organization than Darkness to Light, whereas what Darkness to Light does, the entirety of their organization really is this training program. Ounce of Prevention, like larger social services organizations, has a lot of different programs. They've got their hands in a lot of things. And they approached the Impact Grant to really address one program first, which was their home visiting program. But they provide a lot of programs for children in the first 5 years of their life, particularly those in poverty. So before the Impact Grant, they had an in-person training center in Illinois for home visitors, which is what this initial program focused on, and child care providers. And they were pretty dominant in that space in Illinois. But they were looking to take this program, their home visiting training program, and eventually their other programs from the local state level to a national stage, and knew that they needed to leverage technology to do so. They just weren't going to be able to do that and hit that reach if they stayed in person on all of it. So what they spent a lot of time and dedicated effort developing was a bundled curriculum that incorporates self-paced e-learning, webinars, instructor-led training, communities of practice, and they now offer this to a national audience of home visitors, which is one of the first national professional programs, professional development offerings for this. They have worked hard to maintain the high-touch nature of their program, and I know, like many of you, the training that you provide is not as simple as how to learn Excel. It is high touch, it is sensitive, and the question of how to move that online is a big one, and sort of maintain that fidelity is a big one. Something Ouds worked hard to do, and I think they believe that they've really achieved that, and then being able to add even some more things, benefits that they didn't have in person because of the expanded reach and the sort of reporting and the tools that technology can bring. They have brought on many of their other programs now in the same model once they had established it and tested it for the home visiting. So they have brought on a lot of their programs, and they've also then brought on their internal staff. And it's important mentioning because it's not unique from a grantee perspective, whereas especially organizations that are larger then say, well, we could be leveraging these tools internally as well. And while that's not included in the grant, we are more than happy to work with organizations and help figure out if there's a use case for the talent tools internally in your staff for your organization. And then you'll get a glimpse into what their reach numbers are. Again, very different than Darkness to Light just because of the audience that they train. And this is particular to that home visiting space. Okay, so now we've talked about the components, we've talked about some examples. Let's talk about you and what we've learned through the years that would make you a strong candidate right now. So we sort of look at this in a few different levels, first one being organizationally. And here we're looking for a strategic plan, that this is really your priority or one of your priorities. It's not a passing fad. It's not something you're just testing out and want to see how it, throwing up against the wall and seeing what sticks. You've got an articulated vision for what you're looking for and have been thinking about this. And have the support, have leadership support to do so. You've demonstrated capacity to implement and manage technology. You do not need to be a technology company. None of our grantees are, but knowing what a technical implementation looks like is helpful, and knowing the types of things it entails and types of skills that you need to have on board to do it. We ask for you to have an executive sponsor to show executive support in someone that commits and understands the financial commitment in those post-grant years. That person is also there to help remove roadblocks, to ensure that your team's got the capacity and the space to manage the implementation, to take the training. So that person's role is key. From an initiative or a programmatic perspective, most of the grantees that we're working with are not starting a brand new program. Most have already demonstrated that there are positive outcomes for the program, and we really do ask about this, and that this is a program worth scaling, and that you've put that work into understanding that and at least having a very firm perspective on what that growth looks like and the justification for it. That something needs to change, that you can't continue as business as usual, and that technology is going to have to be a play in that. Now, the conversation is a lot larger. I know technology doesn't mean a learning management system is always the piece of the type of technology that's needed. So that it's not always a one-to-one correlation. Usually or often when it's training that you're looking at, that would be the category of tools that you're looking for. So ideally, you've already identified that a learning management system is something that would be useful to you and have started some research along those lines. Back to the content, that you either have existing content or a content strategy for developing content, that within that time frame of when you would expect to have a live system, you would also expect to have live content on it. And really important, again, if you build it, they're not just going to come. So what's your plan? What's your go-to-market plan and strategy for identifying and reaching your audiences? You've done the research. Do you have existing networks and partnerships? Is there existing demand? There is a shift often when you move from in-person training to online training, in that you are developing a product. So you need to think like product marketers and think what is going to be the new approach for getting this product out in the hands of the people that need it. So that's what we will also ask about in terms of what type of thinking you've been doing along those lines. And then your team, we've discussed that, and you've got the roles assigned and allocated. Ideally, the administrators, so the lead administrators, are comfortable with technology. You don't need to be an IT person. Again, that configuring piece is really important. You're not building technology, you're making choices. I like to say that administrators should like playing around with systems, be systems oriented. That's going to be some of the best, that sort of skill level. People are using technology for the first time and trying to get the handle on this, it's a little bit more difficult. And that, again, that team has some cross-functionality, might not be included in every meeting, but that you've got your hooks into marketing, IT, HR, the other organizations or the other functions in the company that you need. Okay, the next steps, and then we're going to go spend the last 10 minutes looking at the functionality. Discuss internally whether this makes sense to you. Some people this just lights a spark right away. Other people say, I'm going to file this away and know that we've got 3 years to shoot for, to work towards making this a reality. So I'm happy to have conversations with you about either of those. If you don't think that this program is right, then are there other ways that we can assist you? Could those nonprofit ready portals, or you're working with teachers and you want to explore more about Teaching Ready? Let us know. Again, we're happy to have conversations about any of these things that might have sparked an interest for you and figure out if this is not the right program, if there's another one that's better. But if you are interested in continuing to pursue this, you can find additional resources on our website. The application will be available there as of January 1st. It's not there now, but you will be able to find links to some of the case studies and the videos. And again, on January 1st, the application, which is an online application, will be available. I mentioned we're having another demo. You can jot this time down in my email follow-up to all of you. I will include a link to registration for this if you would like to partake. Again, it's a really useful way just to see the system live and be able to pose some of your specific questions or challenges or use cases. And then the online application itself is due by March 16th of next year. And after that, what happens is that we down select to our group of finalists, identify those, ask for audited financials from the past 2 years. So at that point, if you get to that point, that's something that you'll want to prepare for. And I say a follow-up discovery phone call, that might be 1 call, that might be 3 calls, but it really is just sort of planning some time to get to know each other better and to dig a little bit more into the application and just continue to explore. And we notify our grantees towards the beginning of May, which then kicks off the rest of that timeline, if you remember, going into the second half of the year of implementation. Okay. Told you I had a lot of talking to do. I'm just going to take a sip of water for a minute. We've got 10 minutes left. I'm going to walk through some of those core system LMS functionality components using examples, real live examples from both our own Ready portals and our grantees to show you what some of this looks like. And again, this is not exhaustive. These are some of the main areas that cuts across almost everyone's use cases and what they need from the system. So the first one is users. Who are your users? How are they getting into the system? How are they accessing the platform and the content? So there tends to be 3 different ways that you can think about this. You could be loading your users in from somewhere else, whether that's on files, data file transfers automated, or you're doing it one at a time, or you're using web services and sort of sending the data back and forth. So that's the case that they're coming from somewhere else. There also could be a case that they're coming from somewhere else let's say your website or an external portal, registration portal, somewhere else that people have to come to first before getting their training. They register there, and then they get a link, or what we call the single sign-on, into training. Or maybe the training center, or whatever you call it, is the first point of access for your users, and they're logging in and registering directly into the site. So, and those aren't all mutually exclusive. Sometimes it can be a combination of all of them, but almost always they are coming from somewhere else first, or they are coming here first. Here's an example of if they're coming here first. If they already have a username and password, you log in. If not, you create a registration page for them to enter the information you need. They can be automatically approved, or they could require approval. It's fairly standard functionality from a registration process. And then once they get in, what do? This is what we call a welcome page, which is usually sort of the branded front page that people are going to see. And you have a lot of flexibility in what this looks like. We help you design this, but normally you are looking to keep it consistent with your website or with whatever portal they're coming through, so it's not a jarring experience. But this is going to be where you are then leading your learners, your users, into the various places in the site that you want them to go to. Now, important to mention that even though I started off talking about how your users are getting in, that's assuming that they're all registered first. There is the ability, which is relevant to many organizations, to have people just browse around, enter the site, find something they're interested in, and then register. So you can set it up so that people can come straight here without registering first. They can search for training, and once they find that training, they have then register for it. It is necessary to register at some point, and that's a question that I do get. You can't, the system is not made to just deliver free training, open training anywhere, but that really is the point of an LMS. You want to be tracking, you want to know who your users are. So you could either stop them for that data up front, or you could stop them for that information once they've indicated that they want something from you. You would go from that welcome page, or even just when you're coming in to browse, to a search for training page, which is increasingly more graphic and visual, sort of a Netflix style of suggesting training, what is relevant to you based on what other people like you have taken. You could search for subjects, types of training. Here it's worth mentioning too, when we talk about content, again, the system is agnostic. You can put in many different types of content, and it handles it a little bit differently. So there are the self-paced online SCORM courses where you're clicking through, it can bookmark, it can talk to the LMS and send back grades or percentage completes. There's videos, which are just going to play, and you say that you've completed them. You've got materials or resources. You could be saying, oh, I took this training externally. I didn't even take it in the LMS, and I want to track it in my transcript, in my sort of backpack, and keep track of it. And then, of course, there's a whole lot of functionality around instructor-led training, whether that's live or virtual, in terms of scheduling and managing rosters and wait lists and all of that as well. And then there's curricula, which combines all of it, and is a way to structure, to pull together different, what we call learning objects, which all of these are, into a a sort of coherent structure, whether it's an onboarding program over a period of several months, or a new facilitator training program. But you want people to take things in a certain order and be able to track exactly where they are. So then once you find that training, or perhaps it was pushed out to you, you have the ability to purchase it if there's a cost. It could be free. It could be free for you. There could be a cost for me. You could come with a 50% off coupon to pay for it. There are lots of different options. And you identify based on who the user is, how or if you want them to pay for training. But you would select a course. Before I add it to the cart, I just want to show that there are ratings and reviews available. Again, not mandatory. You could use it, where you have users submitting their own ratings that will help inform others whether they want to take that course or not. And then if they do, I'll add it to my cart. You go through a typical sort of Amazon shopping cart experience to be able to check it out, and then take the course, which lands on your transcript. Now, I will say again, all of these things, there's a lot of configurability and colors and wording and stuff, so I'm showing you examples. But your transcript is essentially your training backpack, and it tracks everything that is active and everything that is completed for you to return to. It can show how many hours completed. It can show the cost of training. Again, all options, lots and lots of options. But when I launched the training from here or from the catalog, I wanted to just show an example of the different types of training I'm talking about. So an online SCORM course, one that is created that you're clicking through, you're perhaps taking quizzes. This is what's communicating back to the learning management system. These type of courses, this is what you want to be using that Articulate software, Captivate software, some tools to develop. Videos are more and more common when we're looking at learning now because they're easier to develop, they are cross-platform, and is shorter. Everything is moving to shorter and bite-sized, so video works really well for that. So just showing you a video example. And then I mentioned the curriculum, which pulls all things together. So in the same way that you could launch just a video, you could also embed a video into a larger training program and guide people through which steps they need to take first, what they need to complete in the first week, the test they need to finish before moving on to the second section, whatever those rules are. And then after any course, should you choose, or curriculum, you can have completion certificates available from the site. They can be emailed out. There are many, many email notifications that you can configure to warn people when when they have a course that they're registered for, when it's complete, when the new one is there, when they've changed their passwords. You determine all of that. And then there's an informal learning area too, which we call Connect, where you can use as communities of practice of bringing people together. It can be standalone and creating, discussions and submitting their own resources, or more and more often you can use this as part of a cohort training where people are going through a session together. Perhaps they have in-person training, perhaps they've got some videos or pre-work to do, and then afterwards they have an ongoing forum for sharing or for responding to their instructor through a more informal learning community. All areas that will go in more depth on the demo. I know I've just got a few minutes left. I've got 2 more slides, I think, so I'm getting there. Quick mention that there is, you have the ability to configure different security roles and permissions across the portal, and this is really just to show how you may have some global administrators that do everything in the system, and then you have got the ability to constrain different administrators to different groups of people. Or maybe you've got a partner that's only responsible for the people that they bring in, and you give that person a role that only allows them to see and perform things for their users. So there's lots of different ways to slice and dice up the audience, both from a user perspective and an administrator perspective. What's going to be really important to the administrators and also perhaps just to executives or people you want a permission from reports is all the robust reporting tools that are available. This is showing custom reports where you basically can choose from any of the fields available to you, build out your own reports, export them to Excel, to CSV, or for many of them, the opportunity to make dashboards where you can set up dashboards for yourself, for your training administrators, for your executives, so they can get sort of a one-glance view at the most essential data. very last slide. Two things that come up, and no doubt will be things that we'll want to talk more about, but a lot of questions always around mobile. The platform is mobile responsive, increasingly more so. It is an area that Cornerstone is putting a lot of effort into, making sure that just the standard application is responsive across browsers. We also have a mobile app for iOS and Android, and are coming out with a new one that will just be learning specific. And then integrations, which is always a big question. As I mentioned, we can send data back and forth pretty much between any systems with inbound data feeds, outbound data feeds, web services. It does require some technical expertise on your end, so I won't say that's a complete layman's job. There is some technical project work that needs to be part of that. And since I know that many of us use Salesforce, that tends to be a large one that people ask about integrating. So we do integrate with Salesforce just as with any other platforms. It is not native, so it is not a plug-in, if you will, and does require the same amount of sort of work as it does integrating between other systems. And if you've got specific questions about Salesforce, other systems integrations, we can always follow up on that. Okay, this is the top of the hour. This is a slide that you should already know if you're still here. This is just repeating those next steps and the resource links, which I will send out to all of you afterwards when I have the recording of this and the slides, so you can refer back to all of it. Thank you all so much for joining and for sticking with me to the end. Feel free when I email you to respond if you have any questions. Otherwise, I would say the next step, if you continue to be interested, is to book yourself out for that next demo and to give yourself a little reminder at the very beginning of January that our application will be available. So thank you so much, and I look forward to continuing the conversations.